Hey everyone, welcome back to your favorite revenue podcast. I'm your host, Ross Rich, and today we have a very special guest. We have Mark Wayland, the CRO of Box, and really excited to dive into some of his tips and tricks around operationalizing deal excellence. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Ross. Great to be here.
Awesome. Well, before we dive into the details, maybe if the audience doesn't know the legend Mark here, I'll have you maybe share a bit about your path to revenue leadership. I always say that we didn't usually wake up as a 5-year-old and say, "Hey, mom, I want to become a CRO when I grow up." So, yeah, how did you find your way into being the CRO of Box here?
Well, first of all, I'm far from a legend, but yeah, I think I was probably destined to be in sales. My grandfather and my father were both furniture salespeople. My dad had a territory which was the whole of Northern California when I was a kid, and he would, get in his Oldsmobile and drive. He'd have a sales call in Ukiah and then one in Redding and one in Stockton, all in a day. I think he was driving 100,000 miles a year selling like really gross Americana furniture. and and I got my first job when I was 11 years old selling peanuts at Cal Berkeley's Memorial Stadium. So I sold peanuts during football games. Put myself through college in sales roles, selling computers and waiting tables, which is a commission job selling food. And then started my career kind of in the early days of the Silicon Valley in 1993 selling hardware in the Valley.
Amazing, amazing. And what do you think after all the years of experience you have, what do you think the hardest part of being a revenue leader is?
Um, I think the hardest part being a salesperson, a frontline manager, a second line manager, or a revenue manager is that emotion is the enemy in this business, and that the highs can be quite high and the lows can be quite low. And I think it's really important for all leaders and for reps as well, but it's really important for leaders to really regulate emotion,
Mm,
because the team sort of looks to the revenue leaders for what's that emotional tone. Are we down? Are we up? And I think
hmm.
it's really important. I really learned this from reading books about the great basketball coach John Wooden, about emotion being the enemy, and that you really can't let the highs be too high and the lows be too low. You really got to be emotionally regulated, because those emotions can really clog your brain and clog your thinking and not allow you to make the right decisions.
That's the first time I've heard that one, and it definitely rings true with the great leaders that I've worked for, right? They just kind of have this like steady state of kind of operating the business, and you always feel kind of secure and have a high degree of trust with someone who is able to kind of get through that stuff and not get too high or too low. So that's a good one to think about.
Yeah, and it takes a while. Like earlier in my career, you'd win a good deal, and it would the celebrations that I would feel inside of me would be so high. And then when you'd lose a deal, I'd want to put my fist through a wall. And that's not good. You got to be much more regulated in this business because it's so up and down.
Totally. That's a great call out, especially if you want a long career in this business, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, let's shift gears to kind of the core of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, kind of your three tips around operationalizing deal excellence. And maybe I'll just hit the overview of the three and then we can dive into them if that sounds good.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So the first one, love this, is to codify what excellence actually looks like for your specific business and setting what that standard is if you're going to ask people to execute against it. So it makes a lot of sense to start there. The second is using your frontline managers as kind of levers to live the standards and the culture that you're setting through partnering with them. They need to be bought in. You need to get their input. It needs to be a collaboration if they're going to be relied upon to drive those standards. And
Hmm.
then lastly, measure it, celebrate it, but also make sure if it's not happening to course correct quickly.
Yep.
So those are the three we're going to talk about. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with number one.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you mean by what does it look like to codify
Yeah.
excellence? Is this a gong recording that people listen to? Is this the Salesforce stages? What does it look like to feel really confident in what does great look like in our business?
Yeah, well, just first of all, when I got the prompt from you on operationalizing deal excellence, I had to give that some thought because there's so many things that lead into deal excellence. It's, who you hire and what your comp plans are and what your routes to market. There's so many different things that become a part of it. But if you just get down to the very simple part of how do you make sure that the very best sort of profile of a deal and the way you want your company to execute on deals, how do you make sure that happens over and over and over again in a repeatable fashion? So I think the first thing you have to do is codify what is sort of a perfect deal look like. And for every business, it is different. When I started in sales, if you read the Challenger sale, I started in sales before the internet. So the customers, they weren't so well informed about what the solutions were to their problem. And
Hmm.
so like a perfect deal in those days was if I got in first, it was just critical to get in first, because if I got in
Yeah.
first, then I could set the buying criteria and then set traps for my competitors that came in after. That game doesn't really work very much anymore. The customers are too well informed. So
Hmm.
and then likewise, when I left Salesforce after 10 years and I went to Tanium, I was going from sort of selling SaaS applications, business apps, to selling endpoint security. I found when I got there that a really important part of the sales motion was to get into a proof of concept. Like it was critical to get the customers to lean into doing a POC. Where at
Hmm.
Salesforce, we really tried to avoid POCs because we thought they extended the sales cycle. So whatever model you have in your head of what a perfect deal is on where you're currently employed, you have to know that where you go next, maybe only 50% of it transfers, or maybe if you're going to a very similar industry, maybe 90% of it transfers. But you really got to, use the thing attached to the top of your neck to think about what does a perfect deal look like in your business. So codify that, document it, and make sure that you have agreement across the team on what that looks like.
Yeah, love that. I see, constantly hear from other founders and CEOs, hey, we hired this amazing revenue leader. They were at this business and they didn't adjust for what their current company looks like, their unique product, their go-to-market motion, their customers. So that's a great call out. Before we shift gears to kind of the frontline reinforcement of this, how do you think you effectively, document it, right? So let's say we know what great looks like. We have an example of, ICP, perfect customer, all this stuff. How do you help share that with the rest of the organization? Like, what do those artifacts look like at the end of the day?
I think it depends on the company. I think it's going to land, I think, in a variety of places, right? It's going to end up in slides, it's going to end up in recorded enablement sessions, it's going to land in sales kickoff presentations. I think it ends up in a lot of different places.
Mhm.
So I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think it's sort of situational.
Got it. Yeah. I guess it lives in everything then is a good answer, right? It needs to
Yeah.
permeate everything that you do to reinforce. Makes sense. Cool. Shifting gears, and this has been a learning of mine going through these sessions, is I think the best revenue leaders see their frontline managers as their biggest lever to reinforcing excellence on the field. So curious to hear kind of how you think about that and really partnering closely with those frontline managers.
Yeah, well, I've long been a believer that the frontline managers are the most important role in a sales organization because, reps, they do sort of come and go in companies, unfortunately. They move on, they get promoted there, or they get poached. Um, or territories change, they might move within your company. Um, but when you're doing any sort of a change initiative, or if you're trying to do something like operationalize deal excellence, it's where the rubber meets the road. It really stops and starts with the frontline sales managers, and they are in the trenches. And I mean, like literally in the trenches. I remember when I lived in New York City, I would always see these, groups of like union workers, repairing potholes. And there would be like, four dudes on the ground with the shovels that are doing the work. And there'd be one guy just like standing there, and that's the man. He's not lifting a shovel. He's just standing there. And that's not the role of a sales leader. Like the frontline sales managers are in the hole. They're doing the work. And so
Mhm.
if you're trying to get something to stick, like here's what we think our sort of ideal deal profile looks like, you have to have them on board. And if you don't, those sorts of initiatives generally will fail.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And how do you think about getting buy-in? So let's say you have, we're launching a new product and we're gonna have to get all of our sellers figuring out how to sell this new thing and educate them and talk to existing customers, all that stuff. How do you think about partnering with that group of folks to make sure that they understand and that you're getting the feedback before you put this on those frontline sellers?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it starts with number one. When you're doing that exercise of codifying what does the right deal profile look like, you want your frontline managers to be involved in that. So by involving them in that codification effort, you're getting their buy-in from the start because their fingerprints are on it. Like
Mm.
if when we codify what the perfect deal looks like, if they know their fingerprints are on it, then they are almost definitionally but bought in, right? That's I think an important part. Um, and then I also think it's important to, some of their ideas might not be correct. And you have different segments and different regions, and you have to take all those things into account. I also think it's important to, you have to be involved in deals yourself. So as a revenue leader, if you're a VP of sales or a CRO, this is not something that you can do from behind your desk or in Zoom meetings. You have to be in front of customers. You have to have the experience of seeing what it looks like to get a deal all the way through to closure. So you have first party experience to sort of balance the feedback that you're getting from the teams. And then once you take all that information from reps, from managers, from your first party experience in front of customers, and you codify what that deal looks like, then you have to educate everyone on it and get them on board. Some of the feedback that you got from some of those frontline managers may be slightly different from what we arrive at as a final end product, and you got to get them on board. So get their feedback, educate them on what that deal profile looks like, and get them on board.
Totally. I think, yeah, two things that you mentioned there that might not be automatic for a lot of teams, I think that are really important to call out. One, when you're doing the codification and the standards, having them a part of it, don't just sell them this after, right? It's not, hey, I did the meeting with the frontline managers. I told them what we're doing. They shared some feedback, like being in the room with them. And then also, I think I love the, John McMahon qualified sales leader approach of like you're saying, actually be there with the reps. This isn't yeah, standing by the sidelines and telling them what to do. You're not going to have the understanding of what the reality is like in the field if you're not there, right? Like there's the broken
Absolutely.
telephone. You're losing so exponential information and data points when you're just hearing it or even listening to a gong call. You don't have the connection to it, right?
Absolutely. Definitely.
Awesome. And then wrapping things up, okay, let's say we nailed what excellence looks like for our particular product in different segments, and the frontline managers are super bought in. And I'm on the front lines, and we get it. It's not done, right? We know what most of these initiatives look like once you get there, and you don't reinforce it well, and you don't measure it, and you don't drive accountability around it. Everyone forgets about it 3 weeks later, and that's that. So how do you make sure these things stick? How do you make sure that this becomes a reality of the culture of the company you're at?
Yeah, well, so first of all, you have to measure it. So, depending on what your selling motion is like, I mean, if one of the things in your codified kind of deal profile is who the person is that you're selling to, or what are the role types in the enterprise, for example, that you're selling to, then you want to measure that, and you want to measure it as far upstream as possible. Like you want to measure it in the prospecting stage. Are we prospecting into the right role types in the right target accounts? And then are we connecting with them? Are we meeting with them? Are they engaged in the deal? You can use Medic, there's all sorts of ways of doing it, but you have to measure what it is that is connected to your ideal kind of deal profile. And then I worked for a leader years ago who said, you have to train teams in the morning, you have to train them again after lunch. So I think you really have to
I
be
like that.
repetitive in your messaging in a lot of these things, and that means you have to celebrate success. So where you see these things working well, and it's not only when the deals close, right? So like when the bell is rung or the gong is hit, that's not the only time. It's like when you see the right kind of prospecting efforts, or when you see like a pitch done in the right way or objections handled in the right way. These are all individual components of that codified deal type. So you want to celebrate those sort of small efforts, the micro moments, and then you want to celebrate the deals themselves. And you want to do it always. Like that's something that you got to do over and over and over again. And then when you measure it and you celebrate success, there will be times where you are not successful, or maybe you see
Mhm.
behaviors that are not aligned with the way you want to see your teams, driving the sales motion. And that's where you have to do course correction. And so that's back to the FLMs, right? You want to go to those frontline managers, you want to have a conversation with them around, here's some areas where I think we could see some improvement, and then drive that course correction.
Yeah, I love that. Train them in the train them in the morning and after lunch. That definitely resonates. It's so easy you're focused on your quota, you're focused on the next call to not, for this to go in one year and not the other. How do you kind of drive the change? It needs to kind of be constant. If you're not, I love the quote, if you're not, annoyed by how many times you're saying it as a leader, you're probably not saying it enough.
Yes.
Um, and
And
yeah.
sellers are very well tuned to flavor of the month management. So they have worked for people that are running different strategies every month. And so when the sales leader comes out and says, here's the new way we're going to be doing things, they will basically just sit back and wait to see if it sticks, because most of these initiatives that sales leaders come up with when they shift strategies constantly, and sales teams like consistency. They like a consistent strategy that we have time to execute and we stick with it. We don't undo it after 3 weeks when it doesn't work. And so what happens with most of these initiatives that sales leaders roll out is they have the same adoption patterns as hot tubs and gym memberships, which is like really good up front, and then it just everyone goes back to doing things the way they used to, and they don't go to the gym and they don't use the hot tub, and eventually get rid of it. So and so what really needs to happen is you got to stick with it. Repetitive messaging over and over and over again, reminding everyone, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, celebrating successes and course correcting.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to steal that saying. Yeah, the adoptions like the hot tubs and gym membership. Yeah, it's easy to get fired up about it. Hey, we know this is the right stuff. We know we need to be working out and doing this stuff. But if it's not every day, if you don't get that motivation, energy coming from the leadership, it's easy for that to fail and then have a new thing, and then they're not going to trust you, right?
Yep.
Maybe before we kind of shift gears, I'd love to get your take on the course correcting part. I think that's the hardest. I think sometimes people, at least personally, I find it easy to celebrate those micro wins, those big wins. Hey, we're doing this, rah, rah, rah. Harder to have those conversations when it might not be going well, either at the rep level or at the manager level. How do you think about, say you rolled out a new initiative and you're seeing maybe a particular frontline leader or director not necessarily in line with what you were imagining happening? How do you think about making sure that you're still motivating them, but
Mhm.
also getting them on track to your vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to find out, you have to ask why. Why is this leader or this team or this rep having trouble sort of gravitating to the way that we know works and is the
Hmm.
direction that we want to go in? Sometimes it may be because they disagree. They disagree with what the approach is. And that's fine.
Hmm.
Disagreement's fine. And what you don't want silent disagreement. So you have to air those issues out. Maybe maybe some of those disagreements are valid and you can sort of improve things for the betterment of the whole team, right? Or maybe
Hmm.
they're just wrong. And but people want to be heard. And if you've established an environment of trust, you can sort of hear where do those disagreements stem from, and sort of work through them. I mean, I think you have a conversation on that front. But other times, um, people just may not have the aptitude to make the change. I
Mm.
mean, there's some we always speak in these simple thirds. Like if you're doing a large change management initiative, there's a third of the people that are on board already. There's a third that are capable of making the change, and there's a third that won't be able to make the change. And we always have these simple mental models on it, but it's not too far from the truth. So if you're making a big change, it's very possible that a third of the people will not be able to make the change. That's just the way it is. And the sooner
Yeah.
you find out, the better.
No, that's a good way of thinking about things is there's going to be people that are basically probably doing this stuff today. There's a group of
Yep.
people who can get there, and maybe it's not the process that's wrong. Maybe that there is a group of people, if you're trying to up level an organization, who aren't going to make it, especially if it's a big change, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, awesome. Well, before we wrap up here, Mark, we typically do a series of rapid fire questions where we're going to ask for one sentence or one word, if possible, answers.
Okay.
Um, but are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay, let's do it. What do you think the main reason teams miss their ARR targets? You have to say
I,
one thing.
I can't do this in one word, but what I would say is that it's
Yeah.
it's generally because they didn't have a good enough portfolio of deals. And what I mean by that is that in my experience, you need sort of a set of small, medium, and large size deals.
Hmm.
And what you commonly see is like just a whole bunch of small deals, where they're not going to add up to getting to the number, or you see an over reliance on just really, really large deals where the outcomes are binary. Either you crush it or you do nothing. And I really like to see a balance in my business of small, medium, large, and extra large deals. I'd really like to see individuals and teams kind of make their numbers on small, medium, large deals, and then have the extra large deals go over the top, not have them be the thing that makes or misses quarters and years.
Yeah, love that. Reminds me of the pipeline kind of solves all problems is making sure that you have the coverage appropriately to hit your number.
Right. But balanced
Uh,
coverage, like
Balance. Yeah, yeah.
not just made up of like five $1 million deals, and then we either do zero or we do $5 million.
Totally, totally. What is your favorite resource related to revenue leadership? This could be a book, podcast, course, something that you
Yeah,
found
I
really
mean, I've
helpful.
read endless books on business and on sales leadership, and honestly, the very best one, and there is no second place, is the one that keeps peeking out from behind you, and you mentioned it earlier, which is
Oh,
the
qualified
Qualified
sales
Sales
leader.
Leader. It really is the best, and there's no book. There's so many books that are like broadly about leadership across industries. For the industry that I'm in and selling software, that one is just like center of the target. And there's no book I've ever read that has more dog ears in it than that book. I mean, it is like every other page I felt like I was underlying dog earing. It's just full of so many good insights.
Couldn't agree more. Um, your favorite segment, kind of tied to your first question or answer, your favorite segment to sell into, SMB, mid-market, or big enterprise?
I have three kids and I don't have favorites, and I don't have favorites on segments either. There's great things about all of them. I love the volume of SMB. I also love the sellers that are in that segment. They're in this very much growth mindset period of their career where they're spongy and they want to learn and they want to grow. I love mid market because you get this. I love enterprise because you get sort of these large complex deals, and it's like three-dimensional chess oftentimes. Sometimes the sellers in that segment are not as coachable. Um,
Hmm.
in mid market, it's great. You get a little bit of the best of both worlds. So yeah, no favorites, but they're all a lot of fun to sell into.
Awesome. Awesome. And then last one before we wrap up, what is your favorite way to unplug from the demands of leadership and sales?
Well, this time of year, my favorite thing to do is to ski, and yeah, I think a lot of sales leaders out there are really into golf, and I enjoy golf, but I'm just positively terrible at it. Skiing is just a ton of fun, and like the activity itself is an absolute blast. And when you are skiing, it's a mindful exercise. You're totally focused on the thing you're doing. But then in between each run, you're on a chair with your family or your friends, and it's social, and like it's just a total great disconnect from work and a blast while you're doing it.
No, I love that. And yeah, reminds me of the days during COVID where you could move up to Tahoe and not have to go into person in meetings and no one wants to see you and you could be skiing all the time. So
Yeah, I didn't
yeah.
experience that, but it sounds like maybe you did.
Totally. Well, you're out in where are you now? Is there skiing
I'm in
in
Jackson
Wyoming?
Hole.
Or
Yeah, no,
Jacksonville? Yeah, okay.
yeah,
Then you're in the
incredible
capital.
skiing. Yeah, it's great. It's
Amazing.
I mean, I'm not skiing now, but apparently people are, and it sounds like it's fun.
Totally, totally. Well, Mark, really appreciate you taking your time to share your hard-earned lessons and guidance here for other sales leaders looking to up-level their team and really operationalize some deal excellence. So thanks so much for making the time.